During the late 1800s, the mere mention of the Daltons struck fear into the hearts of towns across the frontier West. Known for their ruthlessness, they terrorized communities through robbery and murder, often outsmarting law enforcement. However, their reign of terror came to an end on an October day in 1892 when citizens fought back, bringing them down in a hail of gunfire. Indian Territory, spanning 74,000 square miles during the 1870s and 80s, was a hotbed of criminal activity. Bootleggers peddled illegal alcohol to Native Americans. Highwaymen plundered without consequence, and gun-related deaths were common and largely unpunished. Adding to the chaos, fugitives from justice in other states often sought refuge in the territory, exploiting its vastness to evade capture. Only a handful of deputy marshals, operating out of Judge Isaac C. Parker's court in Fort Smith, were tasked with maintaining order in the territory, an impossible job given its size and lawlessness. By the early 1890s, many infamous outlaws of the Wild West, such as Jesse James and Billy the Kid, had either met violent ends or were serving time behind bars. Despite this, the territory continued to produce enough criminals to keep the marshals perpetually occupied. Among the notorious outlaw groups of the time, none were more feared than the Dalton gang. Emerging from their hideouts in the nations, they struck fear into the hearts of citizens across Kansas, Texas, New Mexico, and pre-statehood Oklahoma, brazenly robbing trains and banks. The gang operated with a loose structure, their numbers ebbing and flowing as members joined and departed. Among their ranks were infamous figures like Bitter Creek Newcomb, blackface Charlie Bryant, whose face bore the permanent mark of a near-miss pistol shot, the Narrow Gauge Kid, Bill Powers, Dick Texas, Jack Broadwell, and the formidable Bill Doolin. At the core of the gang were three Dalton brothers, Great, Emmett, and their charismatic leader, Bob. Another brother, Bill, occasionally rode with them, but often operated independently in Oklahoma and California. Born in Cass County, Missouri, to Lewis and Adeline Dalton, the brothers hailed from a family with a notorious lineage. Adeline, a member of the younger family of outlaws, maintained a reputation for respectability and hard work despite her husband's irresponsible nature. After bearing 15 children and enduring separation from Lewis, Adeline single-handedly raised their large family, earning a reputation as a caring and industrious mother. Tragically, one of Adeline's sons, Frank, served as a deputy marshal under Judge Parker before meeting his end in a shootout with horse thieves, a fate shared by many who wore the badge in that era. Adeline would go on to bury 4 of her sons who fell victim to gunfire, a testament to the violent and perilous times in which they lived. Bob, Grat, and Emmett briefly experimented with careers in law enforcement, seizing the opportunity for theft, illicit alcohol sales to Native Americans, and overall misconduct. As expected, they were dismissed from their positions and promptly shifted their focus to outright banditry. Robert Reddick Bob Dalton emerged as the natural leader. In 1890, at the age of 22, Bob, known for his cunning, ambition, and sharpshooting skills, organized the group of outlaws that would gain infamy as the Dalton Gang. Evidence suggests that Grat, the eldest brother, was the slowest and least astute of the trio, while Emmett, the youngest, idolized his older siblings and obediently followed Bob's lead. During their initial foray as a gang, they stole 3 herds of horses in the nations and sold them in Kansas, narrowly evading pursuit by Judge Parker's deputy marshals. Subsequently, they escalated to robbing trains and banks, leaving occasional fatalities in their wake. Significant bounties were placed on their heads, motivating determined lawmen like Deputy Marshal Heck Thomas and Wells Fargo's Fred Dodge to relentlessly pursue them. However, Bob's hubris led him to aspire to outshine the legendary status of the now-defunct James Gang. He devised a plan to surpass their most audacious exploits by simultaneously robbing 2 banks, a feat Frank and Jesse James never attempted. He selected Coffeyville, Kansas, as the site of his ambitious heist. The Dalton family had resided near Coffeyville during the boys' early years. Situated at the V-junction of Union and Walnut Streets, the town boasted two banks, the First National and the impressive two-story red brick Condon. Given the brothers' familiarity with the area, it appeared to be an ideal choice for their upcoming venture. Accompanied by Bill Powers and Dick Broadwell, they set out for Kansas. By 1892, Coffeyville had transformed from its rowdy beginnings into a thriving community catering to various interests, including farmers, businessmen, cattlemen, and cowboys. It featured numerous establishments such as mills, a cheese factory, barber shops, livery stables, and family restaurants, along with stores selling drugs, hardware, lumber, dry goods, and shoes. Adeline Dalton had even purchased shoes for her sons from George Cubine's shop in the town. On the morning of the planned robbery, Coffeyville was undergoing urban development, with construction underway to add curbs and gutters to the street in front of the banks. Consequently, all hitching posts, including the one intended for the gang's getaway horses, had been removed. While initially perceived as a minor inconvenience, this detail would prove to be a fatal error. To conceal their identities, the Daltons and their accomplices donned false beards and sideburns upon entering Coffeyville. Armed to the teeth, Bob had generously provided each member with factory-engraved, pearl-handled .45 caliber Colt revolvers, with himself carrying 3 pistols. However, it was their Winchester repeating rifles that would soon play a pivotal role in the unfolding tragedy. Upon discovering the absence of hitching rails, the 5 men rode into a narrow passage behind buildings and tethered their horses to a wooden fence. This mundane stretch of land would soon gain the grim and apt moniker, Death Alley. Positioned more than 100 yards from their intended targets, the outlaws readied their rifles and split into 2 groups. Gratt, Powers, and Broadwell entered the Condon Bank, while Bob and Emmett, still disguised with crude false beards, entered the First National. Around 9:30 in the morning, the streets outside the banks grew increasingly crowded with pedestrians, horses, and wagons. Initially, the armed men drew little attention, as hunting season justified the presence of rifles in town. However, dry goods merchant Alec McKenna, recognizing Gratt among the group, observed their movements closely. As the outlaws dispersed, McKenna witnessed one aiming his rifle at the bank clerk through a large window. Realizing the loss of their element of surprise, McKenna sprung into action, raising the alarm. In response, men abandoned their tasks, arming themselves or seeking weapons from Isham's hardware store. Armed citizens swiftly took positions around the plaza, training their sights on the banks, ready for whatever confrontation lay ahead. Inside the banks, the situation was dire for the would-be robbers, oblivious to the impending confrontation just outside. Cashier Charles Ball complied with Gratt's demand, filling a grain sack with money from the counter and cash drawer. When Gratt insisted on accessing the vault, Ball improvised, claiming it was on a time lock set to open at 9:30. Despite the large wall clock showing it was already 9:40, Gratt, displaying what one observer called his sluggish wit, opted to wait. Meanwhile, in the First National Bank, bookkeeper Bert Ayers stalled Bob's demands, despite threats of violence. Claiming ignorance of the safe's combination, Ayers delayed their progress. Eventually, Bob and Emmett gathered around $20,000 in gold and paper currency. With no shots fired thus far, their only remaining task was to make a swift exit to their waiting horses. Marching the bank employees and customers ahead of them, they exited the bank, directly into the crosshairs of the townspeople's rifles. Gunfire erupted, sending dozens diving for cover as Bob's captives fled into the street, while the Dalton brothers retreated back into the bank. Rounds powered into the building as defenders fired from every available vantage point, including doorways and rooftops. While Gratt and his accomplices lingered in the Condon Bank, a barrage of bullets suddenly riddled the walls and shattered the windows. Dick Broadwell took a hit to the arm, rendering his rifle useless, while Bill Powers, was struck in the chest by a round fired from a hardware store worker. Witnessing the chaos from outside, a bystander likened the outlaws' frantic movements within the bank to trapped rats seeking escape. Had they conducted proper reconnaissance, they would have known of the bank's rear exit, offering a safer route away from the gunfire. Meanwhile, in the First National Bank, Bob Dalton spotted a back door, and using a bank teller as a shield, he and Emmett made their exit into a nearby vacant lot. Encountering young Lucius Baldwin, who mistook them for fellow citizens, Bob swiftly silenced him with a fatal shot, a tragic first casualty among the townsfolk. Amidst the exchange of gunfire, the outlaws inflicted significant harm. Either Powers or Broadwell wounded hardware employee Arthur Reynolds before being injured themselves, while Bob's accurate marksmanship resulted in multiple casualties. He shot one man in the hand and delivered 3 fatal shots to bootmaker George Cubine, who was also an old family friend. Additionally, when Charles Brown attempted to retrieve his dying friend's rifle, Dalton fatally shot him as well. Intent on securing their getaway, the gang sought to tether their horses at McCoy's hardware store or the Opera House, only to find the street disrupted and the hitching posts removed. Forced to adapt, they rode south on Maple Street before dismounting and securing their horses in a narrow alley. Bob and Grat assumed leadership roles in the raid, but both made critical errors. Despite being the eldest at 31, Grat's leadership proved lacking, leading to a disastrous outcome in the Condone Bank. Their decision to tether the horses in a poorly chosen location further compounded their predicament. As they fled the Condone Bank, Grat hastily stuffed paper money into his vest, and the trio dashed across the plaza amidst a barrage of gunfire. Witnesses noted their headlong flight, likening it to facing a fierce wind. Despite sustaining heavy injuries, Grat and Powers managed to stagger into the alley, where the chaos of battle engulfed them. Bob and Emmett provided covering fire as their comrades struggled to reach safety. Bob, spotting bank employee Tom Ayers, inflicted a grave wound, yet Ayers miraculously survived to recount the harrowing events. The alley became a focal point of the townspeople's assault as the outlaws fought desperately to reach their horses. Powers succumbed to his wounds beside his mount, while Broadwell, despite being wounded again, remained on his feet. Despite his severe injuries, Grat continued to return fire, finding scant shelter within the alley's confines. Tragically, as the beloved town marshal Charlie Connolly entered the alley, Grat fatally shot him in the back. In a dramatic turn, livery owner John Cloer, renowned for his marksmanship, took aim at Grat Dalton and delivered a fatal shot to the throat, instantly ending his life. Despite sustaining injuries, Dick Broadwell managed to mount his horse amidst the chaos. However, he became a target for 2 townsfolk who fired upon him at close range with rifle and shotgun. Despite their onslaught, Broadwell clung to the saddle horn as he rode out of the alley, only to meet his demise less than a mile outside of town. Unaware of their comrades' fate, Bob and Emmett made their way to the alley and their awaiting horses. Reflecting on their escape, Emmett recalled his brother's unwavering confidence in their ability to evade capture. Bob advised caution, believing he could overcome the entire town if given the chance. However, their optimism was short-lived as Bob was struck by gunfire upon entering the alley, collapsing against a pile of cobblestones. Despite Emmett's previous fortune, he too was wounded multiple times upon entering the alley, with one shot fracturing his arm. With determination fueled by fraternal loyalty, Emmett mounted a horse and began to ride out of the alley, carrying the money sack. However, upon seeing his dying brother, he made a courageous decision to turn back into the fray, forsaking thoughts of escape or self-preservation. In a poignant moment, Emmett reached out to Bob, who may have uttered final words of encouragement or resignation, though accounts vary. In the midst of this brave but futile gesture, Emmett became a target once more, falling to the ground amidst the gunfire that had already claimed the lives of his brothers and comrades. As someone cried out that all the outlaws had been brought down, the once deafening gunfire fell silent, allowing the townsfolk to take in the grim aftermath. Described by one chronicler as a scene of horror, Death Alley bore witness to the carnage of the shootout. Despite his numerous wounds, Emmett remained conscious and was transported to the doctor's office, where calls for his immediate lynching rang out. However, the doctor assured the crowd that there was no need for a rope, as Emmett's injuries were deemed fatal. Remarkably, Emmett, who had sustained a staggering 25 wounds, defied expectations and survived. Boards were hastily erected in the alley, serving as makeshift platforms for the bodies of the 4 slain outlaws, laid out and photographed before being buried in plain coffins in the local cemetery. For decades, their graves remained unmarked, save for a lone lead pipe placed anonymously upon them. While Dick Broadwell's family reclaimed his body, the remains of the other 3 outlaws remained in Coffeyville. Following their burial, Adeline Dalton, accompanied by 2 of her remaining sons, journeyed to the town to bid farewell to her fallen children. Despite the criminal deeds of her sons, Adeline was received with courtesy and sympathy by the townspeople. Among those accompanying her was Bill Dalton, who expressed indignation over the deaths of his brothers, acknowledging their misguided actions but asserting their right to defend themselves against those seeking their demise. In a tragic turn, Bill Dalton himself would later join the ranks of outlaws, forming a gang with notorious figures like Bill Doolin. His life ended in a similar fashion to his brothers, falling to the guns of lawmen less than 2 years later. Today, Bill's final resting place remains unmarked in his wife's family plot in Turlock, California. Even though their horses and potential escape lay just over 100 yards away, the distance might as well have been insurmountable, given the perilous situation facing the outlaws. Esham's hardware store provided a vantage point for the citizens, turning the alley into a deadly trap. Amidst the chaos, Bob defiantly proclaimed his ability to overcome the entire town, only to be struck down by a bullet from one of the high windows, fired by John Kluwer, or another sharpshooter. The citizens of Coffeyville exhibited remarkable bravery as they confronted the Dalton gang's assault on their town. John Kluwer's heroism earned him recognition in the form of a factory-engraved rifle from the Winchester factory, though he remained modest about his role in the conflict. Numerous other individuals displayed equal courage, their actions going uncelebrated. Despite the brief duration of the gunfight, lasting only 10 or 12 minutes, the toll was devastating. In addition to the 4 outlaws killed, the chaos wrought by the Daltons resulted in the deaths of 4 prominent citizens of Coffeyville, with several others sustaining injuries. Emmett Dalton, still recovering from his wounds, received a life sentence at the Kansas State Penitentiary. After spending 15 years behind bars, he was eventually granted a full pardon. Emmett went on to live a long life, delving into the history of the Dalton gang through his writings and becoming a notable figure in Hollywood due to the influence of his books on Dalton-themed films. He also ensured that his brothers and Bill Powers received proper recognition, ordering a headstone to mark their graves. While the sacrifices of the 4 citizens who perished defending their town on that fateful October morning may not be readily recalled by most Western history enthusiasts, the romanticized legend of the Daltons continues to thrive. Recently, 2 photographs capturing the bodies of the outlaws fetched a staggering sum of over $6,000 at a Western collectibles auction. Moreover, just under 10 years ago, one of Bob Dalton's intricately engraved Colts commanded an impressive price of $322,000 at auction. Despite the Daltons' criminal endeavors ultimately leading to their demise, the legacy they left behind continues to captivate public interest and generate significant revenue, far surpassing what they could have imagined accruing through their illicit activities. Amidst the chaos of the gunfight, witnesses describe a scene of devastation, with dead and dying horses littering the ground alongside smoking Winchesters. The square echoed with the cries of excited men, weeping women, and screaming children as throngs of people emerged from doorways and streets to witness the aftermath. Among the brave individuals who played pivotal roles in confronting the outlaws was John J. Kluwer, a Bavarian immigrant renowned for his marksmanship. Despite his modesty, Kluwer's skill with a rifle was widely acknowledged, with reports crediting him for taking down Grat, Bob Dalton, and Dick Broadwell. Kluwer himself humbly recounted his actions, attributing the fatal shot to Grat Dalton to a stroke of luck, aiming for his head, but hitting him in the neck, instantly breaking his neck. Another unsung hero of the Coffeyville shootout was Carey Seaman, a barber by trade who found himself thrust into the fray upon returning to work after a hunting trip. Armed with his shotgun, Seaman bravely confronted Emmett Dalton, delivering the decisive blows that brought an end to the conflict. In the aftermath of the shootout, these courageous individuals, along with others whose deeds went unheralded, stood as testament to the resilience and valor of the citizens of Coffeyville in the face of adversity. Adeline and Lewis Dalton were parents to a large family of 15 children, comprising 10 boys and 5 girls. Among the 12 who reached adulthood, tragedy struck when one of their sons, Frank, met his end serving as a lawman. However, the path taken by 4 of Frank's brothers diverged dramatically as they turned to a life of outlawry. These notorious outlaws included Bob, Emmett, Grat, and Bill Dalton. Conversely, Littleton and his brothers Ben, Cole, and Sam chose to lead law-abiding lives, steering clear of the criminal activities that ensnared their siblings. As we conclude our journey through the gripping tale of the Dalton gang and their fateful encounter in Death Alley, it's evident that even the most notorious outlaws eventually meet their match. From their daring exploits to their tragic demise, the story of the Dalton gang serves as a poignant reminder of the consequences of a life lived outside the law. If you enjoyed delving into this thrilling chapter of Western history with us, don't forget to hit the subscribe button below. By subscribing, you'll stay updated on all our future videos exploring fascinating stories from history. Join our community of history enthusiasts, and let's continue uncovering the captivating tales that shape our world. Thank you for watching, and until next time, stay curious.